Conscious Community Podcast is brought to you by Conscious Community Magazine, America's oldest metaphysical magazine, continuously in print since 1979. We feature articles about nutrition, holistic living, yoga, healing, and much more in each monthly issue, as well as regular columns and a comprehensive events calendar and community happening section. Hello and welcome to the Conscious Community Podcast. This episode, we're speaking with Bill Douglas, who wrote The Tao of Tai Chi and is also the host of a DVD called The Anthology of Tai Chi and Qigong, The Prescription for the Future. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
First of all, I'd like to ask you where this World Tai Chi Day comes from. You are the founder of that day, correct?
Mm-hmm. Me and my wife, Angela Wong Douglas.
What inspired you to create this day, and how did you get the word out to various Tai Chi practitioners around the world?
It's kind of a multi-layered process. Originally, what happened was when we first started teaching Tai Chi and Qigong, it was primarily in like yoga studios. It was considered kind of an esoteric practice, back this was like 40 years ago. Then we got an offer to teach Tai Chi through a major medical center in the Kansas City area, the Shawnee Mission Medical Center. The first 8-week session that we had a whole bunch of medical health professionals, physicians. We had a surgeon, a pharmacologist, an ER physician, and a nurse rehab program director in the first class. And so we went through the 8-week session. These doctors in the class started seeing really amazing results. The pharmacologist saw his high blood pressure go down very significantly. In fact, so much so that he got his general practitioner to write him a prescription for Tai Chi for his hypertension because he was going to try to get his insurance company to cover his Tai Chi classes. And then the surgeon, she had a whiplash injury that caused chronic pain and limited mobility, and she had that for many years. And after the 8-week session, she not only didn't have the chronic pain, but she regained full mobility. And so it was just blowing these people's minds. And so then what they started doing was they started using, this is before I was really savvy with the internet, it was, way back. And this was 20 years ago. This will actually be the 20th anniversary of World Tai Chi Day. So they were using their hospital database to look up Tai Chi medical research, and they started handing me the medical research because I'd never really thought of Tai Chi as a medical practice before. I came to it for stress. My father was in frontline combat for 3 years, and he had post-traumatic stress disorder, and so I had post-traumatic stress disorder from growing up, around him. And so it was stress and depression and things like that drove me to Tai Chi. But I hadn't really looked at it as a medical practice until that class. And then all of a sudden, these physicians started seeing these benefits, and they started handing me this research that they had found through their database on Tai Chi. And at first, I didn't really know what to do with it. I just thought, why are they giving me this? I mean, I'm not a doctor. I'm a Tai Chi teacher. And but as it mounted, and I started to see the potential of Tai Chi and Qigong for what the mass of society is dealing with, on a physical level, we started getting increasingly excited, and we started sending out all this medical research to the media, thinking that the media would, be excited about passing this on to their readers and viewers. Because, probably a majority of the readers and viewers were, dealing with these kind of health issues. And we were kind of shocked and kind of stunned because the media wasn't interested. And so that was really frustrating because, heart disease and, just all kinds of, major, very common health challenges could be very effectively addressed by mind-body practices like Tai Chi and Qigong. And so we were just kind of at a point of frustration and disillusionment. And then what happened was I was sitting in my backyard meditating one day, and I got this idea of creating a mass Tai Chi exhibition that would be so big and so visually unusual that it would be hard for the media to, resist it. And so we spent several months organizing to get as many people as possible onto the south lawn of the Nelson Atkins Museum here in Kansas City. It's a gorgeous location. And then we spent, several months doing media work to, just basically inundate the local TV and newspapers with press releases to try to get them to come and cover it. And so we showed up that day with no idea what was going to happen. And when we pulled up in our van, it was me and Angie and our 2 kids, and we pulled up in our van, and there was nobody there. And the first thought that went through my head was, oh my God, I hope the media doesn't show up. and then all of a sudden people just started walking in from all different directions. And within the span of about maybe 15 minutes or so, there were 200 people out there. And so we got these 200 people to spread out across this beautiful lawn in front of this majestic museum. And we did Tai Chi, and the media showed up in droves. I think we had 3 TV channels there, and we had about 5 different newspapers there, and it was just a spectacularly visual event, And then after we got home from the event, I got a call from one of my assistant Tai Chi teachers named Liz Burke, and she said, we were on CNN today. And I said, what? And she goes, because those were local TV stations, And she said, yeah. And I said, well, how'd you know that? And she said, well, I got a call from a friend of mine in Texas. And she said, we saw you on CNN today. And so then we started getting contacted by other Tai Chi groups that had seen it, and they said, we want to do this too. And so we reserved worldtaichiday.org, which became the official website eventually, and we decided to make this a worldwide event. And in the next year, it was in like 12 different countries and 12 different U.S. states, and it started spreading. And then it was right around that time when we were going to release the first edition of our, me and Angie wrote the Complete Idiot's Guide to Tai Chi and Qigong. The Idiot's Guides, they have all kinds of different topics and subjects and stuff, and we wrote the one for Tai Chi and Qigong. And so we got the publisher to let us put a chapter in there called World Tai Chi Day with this vision. We didn't really know if it was going to take off or not, but we published it as if it had already spread around the world, and then that started spreading awareness of World Tai Chi Day through people that were reading the book, and a lot of them were Tai Chi teachers and Tai Chi masters and stuff. Now it's in hundreds of cities every year on the last Saturday of April in over 80 countries.
Oh wow, that's quite global.
Yeah,
and
it's been officially proclaimed by 22 U.S. governors and senates and legislatures around the world, including New York, California. The Brazilian national government recognized World Tai Chi and Qigong Day, and in fact, last year they opened the World Tai Chi and Qigong Day by holding a moment of silence in the Brazilian National Congress the day before World Tai Chi and Qigong Day.
Excellent.
One thing I wanted to ask you, I took some Tai Chi. I used to live in Virginia, and our yoga teacher also was a Tai Chi teacher, and she said that we had to do Tai Chi outdoors because that's where the Chi was. I was just curious whether or not you adhere to that belief, or is that a common idea in the Tai Chi world?
I think it is a common idea, and I do like to do Tai Chi and Qigong outdoors. And I encourage my students to do it outdoors as well. But most of the time, classes are held indoors just because of weather constraints and logistics and all that kind of stuff.
I also think it's interesting that Tai Chi and Qigong are oftentimes regarded as kind of a spiritual practice, and there is that aspect to it. But it is also physical exercise, and maybe to someone who hasn't watched it before, it seems very relaxed, but it can be physically, I don't want to say difficult, but it's exercise. Even if you're just moving slowly or holding a pose, like you do it does, make your arms sore, make your legs sore. The breathing exercise aspect as well, like when it comes to medical benefits, I think there's no question that it's good exercise, and exercise has all kinds of beneficial effects, especially when it comes to like blood pressure, and exercising your cardiovascular system is never going to hurt. So I don't think there's any reason or surprise that you should find that it actually does have real medical benefits. And then it's also, there's that meditative aspect as well, which even our previous guest, Monk Yuen Ro, talked about how you could call it meditation in motion, and he calls it medication in motion. Where it's, even though you're moving, it's still a very meditative practice. So some of the benefits that you have from normal seated meditation, you can get from from Tai Chi as well.
Tai Chi and Qigong can be all of the things that you mentioned. They can set the stage for really profound spiritual experiences. And the medical benefits. One of the things that we've done over these years, those doctors kind of got me started on it. I started ever since then. Over the last 20 years, we've been collecting all the breaking medical research on Tai Chi and Qigong. And what you find when you immerse yourself in that data is you start to realize that these mind-body practices, and it's not just Tai Chi and Qigong, meditation, yoga, all these mind-body practices have profound health benefits. Dr. Herbert Benson at Harvard, he wrote the relaxation response, which was really the first medical exposure to the medical research on meditation. And he said that between 60 and 90% of the health issues that bring people to the doctor are caused by stress and best treated by mind-body practices. And then over the years, I came across a study by Kaiser Permanente. I think it was a 20-year study. And they determined that 70% of the illnesses sending people to their doctors were caused by stress. And so I contacted Dr. David Sabel at Kaiser Permanente, and he was very familiar with that study. He'd been interested in mind-body practices. And he said, depending on how you looked at that data, it could go as high as 85% of the health issues sending people to their doctors were caused by stress. And so when you look at that, you begin to realize that we could literally save trillions of dollars over a period of time if we were moving these mind-body practices into society at all levels. And one of the places that it's really insane that it hasn't already happened on a massive scale is in public education. Every school kid, starting from kindergarten all the way through university, should have a mind-body practice taught to them either through health science or physical education or a hybrid of the two. And it would literally save trillions of dollars over time. And, and that has the potential of changing the world because, if you Google it and look it up, you'll find that ending world starvation would only cost about $30 billion. So if we're saving trillions of dollars by spreading these things through society at all levels, we could literally change the world. So these kind of practices have the potential of actually changing the world on many levels, including that one.
I have met people who have children who are in school who are doing those type of practices in their schools. For example, I have a friend who lives in California, and at her daughter's school, they do meditation and yoga. So I believe that is starting to grow, and it needs to grow even more.
There is the fact that there is a spiritual aspect, I think, can be a stumbling block for a lot of people, and we've seen this with other practitioners of other mindfulness, mind-body practices that we've talked to, where because it can be regarded by some as a spiritual practice, people who have very deeply held religious beliefs sometimes oppose it because they feel it's, like just the same way they might oppose yoga, because they feel like it's in conflict with, I can't be this religion and do Tai Chi, or I can't do this religion and do yoga. So I think that's one stumbling block that's important to find ways to explain why it's not in conflict with those things. And the other one is state. In this country, we've got, separation of church and state. So sometimes public schools and stuff like that can be hesitant to have maybe yoga or Tai Chi in a gym class because they feel like it's the state pushing a spiritual practice. But I think there's ways that can be overcome.
You're throwing out a lot of things here. Let me try to on the public education issue. That's really not a problem. All we have to do is teach these things in a secular way, and then they can easily be taught in a secular way. The science on these things is irrefutable. So if you have a technique that will help kids deal with ADD and ADHD and improve their focus and improve their health on a profound level, and it's proven by science, there's no need to teach it in a way that is spiritual on any level. So that's really kind of a straw dog that people throw out there, that it can't be in public education because that, and you alluded to that yourself. You said those things can be dealt with. So it can and it should, and in fact it's really, if you look at the data and look at the science, it's literally insane that we're not teaching these things in public education. Now, you had mentioned that a few schools are doing it, and that's true. And those schools are kind of pioneering how it can be taught. Now, there's a school, I think, in Baltimore, and there's a public school in Baltimore, Maryland, and they got rid of their detention room and they replaced it with a meditation room. And the benefits that they've seen are profound. There's the behavior rate of the students has vastly improved since they've introduced that. So these techniques, and these are mind-body mindfulness techniques. This is scientific. You can measure brain waves. You can measure the brain activity. You can measure the changes in the brain. You can actually see, with modern technology, you can see the changes in the brain that these things produce. And these things are hard science that should be taught in public school yesterday. It's the fact that it's not already happening is really mind-boggling.
Yeah, that's one other thing that I think is an elephant in the room when it comes to anything that can treat or help prevent disease is that the business of medicating these problems is extremely lucrative. Plum, no, go lay down.
Yeah, when you had mentioned that at first the media wasn't interested when you sent them the research, and I was just thinking about, we were at the gym the other day, and I never watched TV, and they have the TVs on, and every other commercial is for a pharmaceutical product.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a big challenge because you've got a lot of money behind pharmaceuticals, and so if you're saying, oh well, if we introduce this practice in schools, we won't need all this ADD medication. I think that's and that was my own experience. I was diagnosed with ADD when I was a teenager and put on meds, and I think I took them for about a year. And then I had started doing martial arts. I had done martial arts before that, but I started it back up again, and I just felt like I could handle it with that practice, and that's what I've done ever since. So I went to my doctor and I took what was left of my medication and I gave it to him and I said, I think I'm going to use some other coping strategies with this. And the response, he was very incredulous that I think that's having good research to show that this does have real world effects and this is not, outside or fringe science or anything. I think that's a really valuable thing to do because there are other ways of handling these things besides a medication. The medication can have pretty significant drawbacks. My personal opinion has always been that that's not really a long-term fix for anything, that it may help you cope in the short term or get through a month of school or something like that. But I think it's really unhealthy for people to go on these medications and stay on them for years. There's
research that validates your personal experience, that has been done that shows that it Tai Chi, for example, can dramatically reduce ADD and ADHD symptoms. And, and of course, it's not just that. I mean, we're talking about, if you look at the data, it's between, 60 and 85% of the health issues that people are facing could best be treated by mind-body practices.
Yeah, it's. I was going to say this actually earlier when you said that we've been going to the gym a lot lately, and I've been doing like Qigong type breathing exercises throughout my workout. So even though I'm doing cardio on a bike or elliptical or weightlifting, I'm still doing like the very deep breathing while I do it. And there's the heart rate monitor on the exercise bike, and I can literally watch my heart rate go from, it'll be like at 120, and then I'll realize I'm not doing my breathing, and I'll start doing my breathing, and without changing my activity level, I can drop my heart rate from like 120 to like 105. And I'm just, and I can literally, I'm kind of doing like a biofeedback thing where I'm watching the heart rate monitor and very consciously breathing and calming myself, and I'll just see my heart rate just drop.
Yeah. My students, I teach for the University of Kansas Hospital, and so my classes have people dealing with all kinds of chronic health issues, and I have one class for people dealing with heart disease, and they talk about those kind of things all the time because it's interesting teaching through a hospital because these people are being, they're getting monitored constantly, and so they get feedback from the data and from their physicians all the time. And the benefits that they see are really profound. In fact, the class that we have for people with heart disease is funded by I didn't realize it at the time, but there were two of the people that were in the class had a foundation, and their cardiologist his mind was so absolutely and completely blown by the progress that he was making with his heart issues due to the Tai Chi classes, that their foundation started funding those hospital Tai Chi classes. And we've actually had that happen 3 times where, people of means were in the classes, and it just so blew their doctors' minds that they ended up writing out a check and funding the classes.
Oh, wow, that's really great. One thing I wanted to touch on with Tai Chi is I see that you've written A Conspiracy of Spirits and 2012 The Awakening, 2 fiction books. And interestingly, Monkey Rowe, who wrote the book Mad Monk Manifesto, which we talked to him about, had also previously written several historical fiction novels. And so I know in your DVD you had mentioned there's a relationship between these practices and creativity. And I was wondering if you could talk us through a little bit about this relationship. And did you feel that you've become more creative the more you do get into the practice?
Yeah, and this kind of segues with the Taoist concepts of Tai Chi. Taoism's it's sort of a philosophy of Tai Chi. The Tao Te Ching has evolved to become kind of the Tai Chi philosophy book. And the concept of Taoism is that if we relax out of the way, that there's great possibility just waiting to expand through us. And part of that is creativity. There was a world-renowned concert pianist, and I can't remember his name. He's from Scotland. And anyway, he had read my book in Scotland, and he was doing a United States tour, and he was going to perform at a university nearby where I live. So he contacted me to see if we could get together while he was here. And he said he talked about how it had profoundly, enhanced his creativity. And I've been contacted by various authors and things with the same comment. When we practice these mindfulness techniques, and Tai Chi and Qigong are kind of the epitome of mindfulness, where they become like a moving meditation. And as we practice relaxing out of the way, we let go of everything that we are so that there's space for this newness to expand through us. And in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu said, if you can let go of what you are, then you can become what you may become. When you look at the science on it, it's basically, the brainwave states go through very significant changes when you practice these mindfulness techniques. And normally people are in the beta brainwave state. It's the busy brainwave state where the brain's in constant activity. But when we practice these mindfulness meditative techniques, the brainwaves go into the alpha state. And the alpha state is kind of a state of pure consciousness where your mind's not racing with concepts. And there was a woman, and I can't remember her name, but I was listening to NPR on the way to one of my Tai Chi classes, and she had written a book, and she had a big concern with the fact that with the digital age that people are like plugged in all the time mentally, and there's no space for boredom. It's like if you look at especially the younger generation, the moment that they get bored, their smartphones come out. And she was concerned about that because research shows that when we're in a state of boredom, and that state of boredom can also segue with a meditative state. It's when you're not thinking. It's when your mind just kind of drifts and wanders. And what happens is our brain goes into they call it integrative consciousness. And what it does is when we go into that state of pure consciousness or integrative consciousness or meditative state or whatever, there's this clarity where there's space and time for all the data and all the information and all the issues and all the challenges that we've been dealing with to kind of restructure and reform in another way. And then what happens is that comes out in the form of creativity, creative thought, new thought. And going back to the ADD issue, one of the things that I wanted to mention real quick that segues with this is that the New York Times had an article in it called "What If Einstein Was on Ritalin?" And the concept of the article is that many of the people that we consider great thinkers and great artists, and that's from comedians to philosophers to Albert Einstein, you name it. It's very likely that these people would have been diagnosed ADD or ADHD if that diagnosis had existed at the time when they were in school, and they very likely would have been put on Ritalin. And so the concept of the article was that a lot of the great art, a lot of the great comedy, a lot of the great scientific breakthroughs that creative minds have accomplished requires us to be able to have that free flow of thought. And that can seem erratic to somebody that's not having a free flow. You know what I mean? But it's actually a very natural human state. And the mind-body practices can cultivate that with everyone, especially with school children.
Yeah, I really don't think, having done, at the time I was diagnosed and since some reading on ADD, I really don't think that it's a disorder. I think that it's just a variation on the norm. And that there's a lot of characteristics, and this is all in the research that I did at the time. I don't remember any of the books that I read offhand, but that there's a lot of evidence that the things that are considered maladaptive in a modern society where you're supposed to sit at a desk and do paperwork, are in fact evolutionary. Our evolution hasn't caught up with the reality of the modern world, and
exactly.
That when you think about, like, you're out on the plains of the Serengeti and you're drinking water from the stream or whatever, you don't want to be focused exclusively on drinking water from the stream. You need to be paying attention to your surroundings, looking out for predators, looking out for things that might hurt you. And if you were completely focused on the task of doing whatever you were in a Stone Age society, you'd end up dead. Having your attention split and bouncing around is actually evolutionarily advantageous in many environments, just not in a modern day office or a classroom. And that I think that a lot of the reason we medicate kids is because they don't want, they won't sit still. But I mean, they're kids. Kids don't want to sit still.
Yeah. Well, and meditation can help with that. But the point that you're making is a really important point, because essentially what the Ritalin does is it gets us it's an attempt to get the round children to squeeze into the square hole. And what these children are doing is they're trying. I mean, they don't realize they're doing it, but really what they're doing is they're trying to help us realize that our whole educational process, and in fact our whole workplace process, it really needs to evolve. Everything could be vastly different. We could be feeding that creativity instead of trying to squeeze it into that square hole. And I think mind-body practices and the creativity and the looseness and the openness that they promote can facilitate societal changes on many different levels.
I think that also segues back to something we talked about with Monkey and Row, and I think is a perennially relevant way to look at it, is that you had two major competing philosophies. You had several others, but the two major ones in ancient China were Taoism and Confucianism. And in a lot of ways, you still see that same dynamic today, that Confucianism was very legalistic and rule-based, and you had these civil service examinations and memorizing Confucian philosophy, and it was very rigid and structured. And then you had Taoism, when it was very free-flowing and creative and almost playful. And that really is, today, you still have basically, you have the Confucians, and they want the kids to sit in lines and do paperwork and memorize things. And you have the Taoists that understand that play is valuable, and that, there's nonlinear ways to go about solving problems and doing work. And that's something I try and bring, whether I'm sweeping a floor or doing paperwork or working on a project. That's something that's the way I work. Like, I'm very productive. I can get a lot of stuff done, and I'm not necessarily following a rigid, structured process in doing so. Right. And it works well, and it makes me much more content than sitting there and doing a repetitive task does. And what I think those who are very prescriptivists with the kind of Confucian idea is that, it is more important to them that you are following the process and going through the steps than what your output is or how valuable your contribution is. The process is the priority, not the result.
The Tao Te Ching said, in doing nothing, all things are done. And, to somebody that doesn't really strive to understand Taoism, they would think, oh, that means doing nothing. But actually what they were talking about is that if we approach things playfully, that it seems as though we're doing nothing, but yet, lots of things are getting done. And Einstein himself said that the most profound form of learning is play. And and if you look at the research, you see that children, if children kept learning, I can't remember exactly what the data was on it, but it was, but the general gist of it was that if children kept learning the way that they learn up until they start formal education, by the time they're 14, they basically have all the doctorate degrees known to humanity. So there's something that stifles our learning when we start getting squeezed into that square hole, and the potential is vast. And the goal of Tai Chi and Qigong is to learn how to relax out of the way of these flowing movements that flow through you. And that physical process of learning how you have to let the mind let go and let the heart let go in order to let the body let go. And so it really, these kind of practices actually promote that free flow. And if that became pervasive through public education, you'd see profound societal changes that would vastly improve the workplace. And the possibilities are endless.
One thing I'd like to also mention, and this is because dance has also been regarded by some traditions as sinful, or it's sometimes thrown into the same category as debauchery of various sorts. That for me, like when I was in my late teens, I also started dancing, and for me, dance was always. I had been doing martial arts and such since I was a little kid, and meditating and whatnot. So for me, it was always very much in the same category, and it's kind of remained in that category for me. I went through a very, difficult, trying period in my life in the last, 5 years, and one of the things I turned to was dancing, and it was very hard for me to communicate to people who I was friends with or who were, trying to get me through this period, how important that was, for the same reasons that doing Tai Chi or meditating were, that I really kind of viewed it. And having done, Tai Chi and Qigong, I kind of integrate that into dance when I dance. And that's to me, that's yet another thing that I think people should look at, as far as, you can do dance in a gym class as well. And I think that has a lot of the same benefits, that it's that flow state. When you're doing it and you're doing it right, it's very much that alpha state.
Yeah, although to be honest with you, I think if you hadn't had the exposure to the meditative practices, I think your dance would be different, because I think.
Oh, absolutely! Absolutely.
Yeah. And so the mindfulness practices have benefits that go beyond any kind of physical endeavor. And so I think what you've done is you've personally brought the mindfulness aspects into your dance, but not all dancers do that. It's not an automatic part of dance. Whereas as far as getting things in school, I don't think having dance would be a good replacement for the mind-body practices, because the mind-body practices bring a whole other quality into the experience. And if you look at the science, that validates.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of dance that's kind of prescribed movements, where it's like, first you do this, then you do that. And that's also, I've literally had people come up to me when I'm dancing and say, no, that's not how you do that. First you do this, then you do this. And I just kind of laughed, and I was like, no, I'm okay. This is how I do it.
Well, I'm actually a music teacher, and I think what we need is just more holistic education. I mean, as a musician, I did music my whole life, and I'm very creative. I'm a composer, but I've gotten so much better in the last 15 years since I started doing more mindfulness practices and really learning how to go with the flow. I mean, that's really the secret. Like you were saying, when we talked about the creativity and the writing and all of that, it's you just need this holistic approach where they all, form together.
Harvard Business School, they did a study, and they made two groups of MBAs that were roughly equivalent, and MBA students, and one of the groups completely dedicated themselves to their business studies, but the other group was given time each day to practice art. Not prescribed art, but just doing art. And interestingly, the art group ended up graduating with higher scores than the control group did.
Yeah.
Higher business scores. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I was a art major for about 3 years, and then I switched to administration, and which could not be further from art. I think when I graduated, I had something like 200 credits of art school and 220 of administration, and I performed far better than most of my classmates in business school, and I very much try and bring a lot of the creative aspects to, that when I'm working on something in marketing or whatever else, that being able to think creatively really helps you solve. I think we talked about this with one of our early guests, who was actually one of my art professors. Plum, go lay down. Go lay down. That one thing that creative things teach you is nonlinear problem solving, in the sense that when you sit down to do a drawing or a painting or work on a piece of music, there isn't an answer and there isn't a prescribed series of steps. It's a you do a little this, and you're solving a problem, but it's a problem for which there is no right answer. And that's very reflective of what reality is like. That if you only did the business school, they would tell you, well, the first thing you do is you create a marketing plan, and the marketing plan looks like this, and you do this. Whereas in real life, you're going to be faced with a dynamic and changing environment and all kinds of things. No two situations are the same. And it's much more like creating a piece of art than it is like what they teach you in business school, where being able to do that nonlinear, creative problem solving. And what we could do, well, let's try doing this. Let's take this idea that I got when I was listening to NPR, and they had some composer, and let's apply that to how we arrange our desks. It can be some things that seem totally unrelated, and that's that holistic creative synthesis that you get from learning the creative process.
Yeah, you start to think holistically. My kids studied meditation when they were young, and then my daughter, she's a landscape architect now, and so she went through a stressful period, and she called me up and told me that she had started meditating again. And one of the things that, like with her, when she's designing, a landscape, project. It's like it becomes a very holistic endeavor, because she's kind of intuitively considering how it's going to affect people psychologically. So she's trying to create a space that's both mentally and emotionally and physically healing. And it was interesting kind of watching the process that she went through, because I attended a conference one time, and there was a Harvard professor there, and she had written a book, and I can't remember exactly what the title of it was, but I think it was the architecture as healing or something like that. And one of the things that she pointed out in the book was that they did a study, and they had patients that had relatively the same conditions and situations and everything. And one set of patients had a window with a view of nature, and the other patients had a window with a view of the wall of the building next door. And the patients that had the view of nature healed much more rapidly than the other patients did. And so that's architecture. And a lot of people, would think, if they were in the Confucian line, they would think, well, a building's a building is a building is a building, right? But when people, practice meditative techniques and they start to think holistically, they start to become much more creative and out of the box and integrative of various disciplines, kind of like my daughter did with her landscape architecture. And society needs that desperately, on all levels. Because everything that we do, it has to consider the psychology of the people involved. It has to consider the health of the people involved. It has to consider the health of the natural environment that we live in. As the planet becomes more and more populated and crowded, our solutions to problems have to become holistic and multidisciplinary, and not in a linear way where every architecture student has to study psychology or health, although a little bit of exposure to that wouldn't hurt. But it's the way that their brains function. If we can get these mindfulness practices into public education, the possibilities and potential that would unfold is so profound that we couldn't even begin to wrap our heads around it right now.
I think one particular realm where this could be kind of useful, and we're going to have to kind of wrap things up here because we're coming up to the end of the hour, but having a background in organizational management, I've been trying to put forward the idea of, you talked about how nature works and the nonlinear nature, and I've been trying to find ways to articulate the idea of, we have a very hierarchical, top-down approach to organizational management where we have org charts and you have a CEO and then you have chief executives under him for various departments, and everything is broken down in a very hierarchical manner, and that's all that same Confucian linear thinking, and that what you end up with is that you have responsive rather than having adaptive organizations, you have reactive organizations. So and because they're reactive, where everything has to go through this chain of command. The person on the bottom has a situation, it goes up the chain of the command, it comes back down the chain of the command. By the time you implement any kind of reaction to any particular situation, it's oftentimes too late, and what you're reacting to is what was the state a week ago or a month ago. So you're always going to be behind the curve, whereas if you design organizations from a more organic, holistic approach, I use the metaphor of like an amoeba, where you're constantly shifting and moving resources and responding in a more organic way, like an organism instead of like a machine. That you can have much more responsive and adaptive organizations that can kind of flow around problems in ways that rigid hierarchical structure can't do.
Well, and I think, the thing that would probably catapult your ideas more successfully in your business would be to try to promote the business to start exposing their management and employees to meditation. And I've taught Tai Chi and Qigong and meditation in some of the largest corporations in the United States. And because everything starts within the framework of the human consciousness. And so people can't be open to holistic ideas unless their brain is functioning in a more holistic way. And the science, the science on meditation and Tai Chi and Qigong and productivity, and also part of that productivity is reducing illness amongst the employees. It's irrefutable. It would save companies such vast amounts of money to make mind-body practices available to their employees, that it becomes a very practical business thing to do. And that's how I have gotten into some of these major corporations. And so that's like I say, that's the ground foundational thing, is to get these consciousness changing techniques into society at all levels. Because if we try to handle it from an organizational level without people's consciousness having changed, then it's trying to handle a problem after it's already become unstable. Whereas if we can deal with people's consciousness, then all kinds of creativity will come out, and some of these people will start sharing your ideas, and they'll think it's their own idea. They won't even realize that it was your idea in the first place.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of when you were the slogan, I guess it is, or what do I want to call it? Not slogan.
Motto?
The motto, yes. That reminds me of the motto you have for World Tai Chi Day, which is one breath, one world, correct? And I wanted to touch on that before we were done, about how this can be used to build more community, which really, what you just talked about, really speaks to like the title of our magazine, Conscious Community. So it does help elevate the consciousness, and it also seems to bring people together and to more of a unified worldview, I suppose. Or
right. Well, one of the things that they found is that when people practice mind body practices, meditative practices, like I said earlier, it increases the empathy and compassion parts of the brain, and it decreases the stress and fear parts of the brain. And most of the division in humanity is because of stress and fear. And empathy and compassion, I see when science looks at the results of these kind of practices and they see those brain changes, they think that the changes came because of brain changes. But I think the brain changes just reflect the experience that you have. When we practice Tai Chi and Qigong and these mindfulness practices, and we start to relax, we start to let go, and we start to kind of feel like we're part of we feel like we're part of the world and the community around us. We feel less isolated. If you go to China and Hong Kong, you rarely see people doing Tai Chi and Qigong alone. They're always doing it in groups. And so when you practice these kind of techniques, you start to become more social. You start to feel more at home on the planet and in your community and in wherever you are, and you feel more connected. And there's been a lot of research that shows that when you practice these things, you feel more connected and less isolated. And so the thing is, when you start to look at the reality of reality, quantum physics, everything is connected. Everything's part of the quantum field. And Einstein said that the idea that we're separate is a delusion. It's an illusion that we've bought into, and that actually, we're connected to everything, and so that's a real physical reality. And so when we let go and we let our consciousness drift on that alpha state, we have that real sense of just kind of being part of a field of connection, and that's when we're feeling the most real. Because we are connected to everything. And then what happens is our brain starts to change to reflect that we feel more empathy, we feel more compassion, we feel more connection with the people around us, and we're a lot easier to deal with, we're a lot more fun to be around. And so I think that if it hadn't been for practicing these practices for 40 years, I don't think I ever would have been able to organize World Tai Chi and Qigong Day, because, I'm dealing with people in all different lands, from Israel to Iran, from Russia to the United States, and speaking different languages, different cultures, and you have to use Google Translate, and that can, it can be, a real, trying kind of thing to try to communicate. But I was able to do it because because Tai Chi and Qigong and meditation had cultivated within me this great sense of connection. And it really, what it did was it just stripped off the veils to help me realize that we all are connected. We're all part of the same one world and one breath. And so that facilitated, creating it. And then also, I don't think it was any accident, because this is, we started this 20 years ago, and at that time there was really no global participatory experience that happened all over the planet at the same time before World Tai Chi and Qigong Day, not on that level, where people are actually participating in it and being a part of it. And so I think that. It was no accident that Tai Chi players and Tai Chi teachers around the world were the ones that ushered this concept in, because it had cultivated in them this sense of connection and this yearning for connection, and so they were very excited and they wanted to be part of a global event, and so I don't think it was any accident that Tai Chi players were the ones that kind of ushered this in to the planet. Now, since then, there's been a lot of similar type of global participatory events. In fact, just a couple of years ago, the Indian government created they don't call it World Yoga Day; they call it International Day of Yoga or something like that.
Oh yeah,
but anyway,
I've done that before.
It's the same concept. And so, but I don't think it was any accident that Tai Chi was the one that really brought this in, because it's always cultivated that within people's consciousness, and it's a real healthy way to see the world, because we are all connected. I mean, the environment, all these things, and economics. If the economy goes bad in one place, it messes up the economy in other places.
Well, it's been great talking to you. We are coming up on an hour. I think Cody is trying to let us know that he agrees.
He wants his dinner.
Well, if everybody can come to World Tai Chi Day,
yes.
It's held all over the planet, and you can go to worldtaichiday.org and get our newsletter. And there's probably a local event. It's on April 27th. It's always the last Saturday of April.
Here in the Chicagoland area where we're based, it's going to be at the Theosophical Society in Wheaton, Illinois. And you
great.
can look up the Theosophical Society online if you're looking for that. And we'll put the date and time and all that
That'd be great.
in the magazine somewhere. And so that's April 27th, 2019.
Yeah, this year. It's always the last Saturday of April, but it's
Okay.
the 27th in 2019.
Thanks for coming on the
Okay.
show.
Yeah, have a nice evening.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Conscious Community Podcast. You can contact us via Twitter at TweetCCPodcast, at TweetCCPodcast, or on Facebook at Conscious Community Podcast.